Okay, I'd like to introduce our second speaker this evening, Mark Kentwell. Mark is the Managing Director and the Licensed Agent of PRD Newcastle and Lake Macquarie. Mark is PRD's #1 selling principal nationally and has been ranked number 15 in Australia across all brands by Real Estate Business magazine. Mark also has sold more homes at auction than any other agent in Newcastle, Lake Macquarie or the Hunter Valley in the last 5 years. In addition, Mark is a real estate speaker and has also appeared on Selling Houses Australia and House Hunters International. Just this week, Mark also took out the Regional Principal of the Year award. So, without further ado, Mark is here this evening to present the pros and cons of buying and owning traditional established property from his perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. I'm here to really talk about existing property, and Newcastle has a high percentage of existing property because, you know, we're the second oldest town in New South Wales. So, and people are quite used to transacting existing property, so most of us here will live in a property that's already been built and been up for some time. And there's more than one form of investment when it comes to property, so I'll explain that as we go as well. I've just got a series of headings to talk on here. You may wish to take some notes or to touch base a little bit later about some of the topics that I speak on. I'll aim to keep it pretty concise and on time. One of the benefits of existing property, and especially the one that you live in, is that your home that you live in can be a form of investment. And what I mean by that is that if your house and land is appreciating over time, then you're actually making money off that investment or you're building an equity base. So there is a major advantage to that living investment that you've got right there. You can add value on the way through, and I'll explain how you can add value on the way through to the home that you actually live in. And one of the fundamental things that governs how property actually goes up in value, which I've just noted here, is that it's actually supply and demand. So it's supply and demand that drives the price of property up over time. Population growth is a factor. The fact that they're not building any more land, you can build more building, but it's hard to build more land unless you actually go out into the ocean like they did over there in Dubai and Oman and areas like that. But essentially, we just have a fixed amount of land. So if you've got a large portion of that land, it's actually the land that goes up in value and it's the building that goes down. And like Wayne said, depreciation is not an evil thing and there's some tax advantages that can be had from it. But it means that over time, that bricks and mortar will start depreciating, becoming older, needing maintenance, whereas that land becomes more and more valuable over time. If you look at the last 10 cycles that have happened in Newcastle, we've got an excellent growth curve. It basically goes up when the market goes up, it pulls back just a tiny bit and then it goes flat for a while and then we go up again. We don't have those massive peaks and troughs and sawtooths that a lot of the other markets around the world and even in Australia tend to have. It's a nice steady curve. We do tend to lag what Sydney does as far as the marketplace goes, but Newcastle's starting to forge its own identity as a real estate market. And not only there's the supply and demand that drive prices, but there's other economic drivers on top of that, and there's market drivers on top of that, which I'll touch on in a minute. The good thing about existing property is that there's a lot clearer 4 ways that you can build equity in that property, whether it's an investment, well, I'll refer to it from an investment point of view at the moment. So let's just say we go and buy a little house in Maryville. It's on 350 square metres. Now, most of you will know where Maryville is, but it's in what I call the inner northern suburbs. So it's just over to the north there as you're heading out Hamill Street. It's in that what we call the Throsby Basin there. There's sort of 5 little villages amongst that. And very highly sought after at the moment. It's sort of thriving from the Honeysuckle precinct. The Wickham train station is going in there, all the changes with the light rail and the big interchange hub. It's got that villagey atmosphere. It's very close to Hamilton as well and close to the harbour. If you were to buy a little cottage in there, let's say it's an old 3-bedroom home, or it's a 2-bedroom home that could be improved because of the land size, you can add value to that property that is higher than the amount of money you spend on it by doing an extension or renovation on that subject to it going through DA, a council. If you're doing it within the walls, there is an advantage though, because a lot of the time if you're not doing anything significant to the structure, you can add value to it by just cosmetic style renovations that you see a lot of on The Block and the Renovators and other shows like that that have created hordes of buyers out there at the moment looking in the market. Another way that you can add value to that existing piece of real estate is to help the rent come up in value. So with apartments, for example, you've got a number of apartments in that block and the rents are quite heavily governed by what the other apartments are getting within that block because they're all so similar. Now that does change per floor like Wayne's saying and with aspects, but essentially bedroom, bathroom, car and the square meterage of that will heavily govern what rents are going for in that building, and the tenants get chatting, and the property managers seem to know what's going on in there, and a lot of that information is readily available. With houses, it's quite easy to make one stand out from another. There's a number of items that you can do to a house to improve the rent for that individual that's there. You could put blinds out the front to stop the westerly sun coming in, you could add an air conditioner to it, you could polish the floors, put a dishwasher in it. Lots of these little things that you can do, or you can actually do a renovation to the property, and it depends how far you go with that renovation as to whether there's a tax advantage to the work that you're doing there or not. But basically, if you improve the rent of that property, it does have an intrinsic link to the actual value of that investment. Because if a property is returning a certain amount, it's going to be more appealing to another investor in the marketplace, and then you can ask more money for that should you wish to cash it in. And banks and valuers will also assess that when they go to check on what your equity is in that investment. There's organic capital growth as an advantage as well, and with all types of property it's out there. But the organic capital growth is one way that you can pick up value within an investment of an existing property. And I'll touch on this a little bit more when we talk about how we pick a good investment, or how we pick a good home to live in that will have an investment potential or a capital growth potential. But essentially, supply and demand comes back to it. If you're looking at a small suburb, and I'll take Cooks Hill for example, there's only about 1,000 homes in Cooks Hill. But I reckon I'd have 1,000 buyers for the homes in Cooks Hill at the present time on our database. And the thing is, and Wayne probably would have a lot of them as well, and the other agents would as well. And there's only a limited number of transactions that go through that market. In fact, 55 Torrens Toll houses only sell in Cooks Hill per year, because not everyone's offering their properties up to the market at any given time. So when you've got 1,000 buyers trying to buy 55 homes in a year, and you then divide that 55 homes up by the 12 months that's available, at any given time there's only 5 homes on the market, and there's 1,000 buyers trying to buy 5 homes. So where do you think that's going to push prices? In an upward direction. And that's why a suburb like Cooks Hill, and I'm not saying just by Cooks Hill, but that's an example, if you look at that kind of equation, that over time it's continued to perform, even if the Sydney market's declining, or they're talking about bad interest rates, or they're talking about a GFC, there's still only 1,000 homes, there's still only 60 sales a year, and there's still lots of people that want to live there. So we'll have a look at what the drivers are at the moment for a suburb like that, or Maryville, or New Lambton, or whatever that might be, that helps that come up. The next thing is the ability to add value. When you've got a piece of land, there's the subdivision potential. So the subdivision can happen right away if you've got a big enough lot and it fits in under the current local environmental plan or under the council guidelines for that area. Or sometimes if you're lucky enough to have a property that is currently zoned a certain type of residential, for example, like normal residential, which might be known as a 1 zoning, where it's just low density. And then they decide that that area is up and coming, there's more infrastructure going in, there's more schools, there's more residents moving in. We're now going to approve that as a higher density or a medium density area, and that might make the land value worth quite a bit more because your block is now double the size of what they're happy to have a block. So you can carve a block off yours and either sell that, build another property on it, or it's just worth more as a piece of land because it is subdividable. So you can just be holding a property and doing nothing to it. And over time, as the marketplace changes, you've got some advantages that come from that. And when there's land involved, they're not building any more land. So that is one of the advantages in there, which are the main things I'm talking about at the moment, disadvantages. So how do we pick a growth area to live in? So I came back before how that the house that you live in can actually be an investment. And when I say an investment, it's just building an equity base. One of the major advantages about your own home in Australia is it's one of the very few capital gains tax-free investments that you can have. Tax-free. It's a real buzzword in a room like this, tax-free. It's what? Yeah, right? So it's quarantined. And there's some pretty loose rules around it, but basically if you live in a home for 5 years and it doubles in value and you move out, and you make $300,000 or $400,000 after your mortgage has been paid out, that's your 400 grand. It's like winning prize money. And they can't tax it. And the advantage of that is when you think about it, like let's just say an average, let's just say to use round numbers that you earn $100,000 and 40% of that gets taxed. It's kind of like you have to go and earn, you know, quite a bit more than that, you know, almost double, 180 grand just to get that 100 grand. Whereas if you make 100 on your property, you get the whole 100. Okay, so there are some advantages to picking the right place to live in. And I've got some clients that have sold 6, 7, 8 properties with me over the last decade that have you know, moved into one, done their little bits and pieces over time. Some of them have done hardly anything to the property, they've just bought well and been shopping in the market. Some of them have renovated, really aesthetically pleasing. Some of them have done substantial renovations that have required DA approval, or just fitted out with new kitchens, bathrooms, all the stuff you see on the TV shows. And they've made massive capital gains on those properties and then just moved in and done it again. And I've got one particular set of clients which I refer to at the moment. They're basically living more than half of their life overseas now, basically permanent holiday. They come over, they do a little reno, and they sell it, get great money for it, go on to another project, put some tenants in it while they go, come back, do it all again. And they've just been making so much money over time, and with smart investment, so it's not an automatic guarantee, but they've done it well, and now they're at the point where they've held a couple of properties, they've put tenants in those properties, and they're cash flow positive now. So they're earning enough income for them to be overseas spending their money, plus the big nest egg that they've got from the properties that they've transacted. So how do we pick a good growth area to actually live in? Well, that first part of it is going to come in, do you want to live there? Because that's going to be a big criteria. But a lot of the time, there's 4 or 5 places, if you really look at it, they've got a lot of the things that you want. There's things that drive the market, and we've got to look at the whole, let's look at the macro market to start with in Newcastle. So I'm not saying the whole of Australia's market, but let's look at Newcastle. What have we got going on in the inner city right now? Like Wayne said, public infrastructure spend. That is a massive driver for growth. So we've got a $340 million light rail, which will probably blow out to more than that. But they say that when you spend $1 from the public sector, the private sector invests $2 into that area. So if you've got a $350 million spend going into an area, that's actually $1 billion going into the area. When $1 billion goes into the area, there's actually more stuff to do and enjoy. So more people want to go there. From a tourist point of view, they want to live there, the rates go up, the council can afford to spend more money on the area, it becomes even better to be around that area, and all of a sudden the values go with it. But it doesn't just happen in the CBD with the light rail, it happens and it emanates out. If you imagine a circus tent, you've got the point in the middle and then you've got it drifting out afterwards. So you might have people that used to live in the city, got a bit too hectic for them, sold up for big bucks, bought 2 suburbs over. Now you've got a new area of settlers there that are happily investing in their properties, renovating. Those areas are coming up in value too. What are other things to look for in those areas? Well, actually, I'll keep going on the investment for a moment. Education is a massive driver of growth. Now, our university out there at Callaghan, at Newcastle campus out there, they've just been ranked number 28 in the world under 50 years old. Okay, that's a big deal. And I know the Asian market, for example, is watching Newcastle very closely as a result of that, because if you think about that kind of credibility there, where a lot of the new universities are in places like China and Europe, and we're number 28 in the world, they want to be near good education. But on top of that, there's a $100 million campus being built right now on the corner of Auckland and Hunter Street. Now that's going to bring, as everyone keeps saying in the paper, about 3,500 students to the city. Now those 3,500 students are predominantly studying business and law, because that's the faculties that will be in there. So their parents are most likely to be business or lawyers or international students, some form of subsidies as well. So a lot of them are prepared to pay good rents. Now that's going to push the rental prices up in the CBD, but not everyone wants to live in the CBD, so the rental prices emanate out as well. Some people prefer to have a yard for their dog, things like that. So you've got to have a look at what are we close to that's going on that's a big advantage at the moment. And there's other things happening in town too, like the courthouse precinct, the GPT mall, all that sort of stuff. That's right in town. What do you look for in the suburb itself? Well, schooling is a big one. Like I said, education, how people like to invest around education. There's schools around town, and those of you that have got kids, especially those at primary school age, will know what the good schools are. And I won't go through each of them because it might be a bit biased and you might say, no, my school's better, or I might even be a teacher at those schools. But there's certain schools that have got great reputations, and that helps property prices. Because imagine a suburb, again, there's only 30 or 50 homes coming through per 1,000. And there's only a certain amount of homes that are going to be available either at the end of the year before the school starts or at the start of the year when school starts. That's going to push people in the northward direction trying to buy into that area, or even the rents. People want to move in, rent for a while before they buy there. So we're going to look at the drivers, and are there multiple drivers for that area as well. Like to also look at, okay, if you were to move out of your house, would there be a tenant for it? So is it an easily consumable product from a rental point of view, or is it way over the median and you're not really going to get a lot of rent for that property? Another thing to look for when you're having a look at what area to live in, what's happened near you. So let's just say, and I'll pick Islington as an example. Hamilton's already gone up a lot in value. Centre in Newcastle's already gone up a lot in value. Islington, for example, is the next one over. So you see about half the homes in Islington right now are renovated. The other half are still there to be bought at the current market rate, but once they all become renovated, all of a sudden the demographics have lifted, you've got the rents coming up as well, and you've got an area that's very desirable to live in. The investment goes very close to what we're talking about with actually a place to live in. But we've got to look at a couple other factors too. If you're going to buy into a property and you want to renovate that place, not just from an area point of view, but how much can you spend on the renovation? Have you really done your numbers right down to the bottom ground? And if it's going to be one of your first investment properties that you buy and you want to do a renovation to that place, you've got to consider what budget have I got to do the renovation and how aggressive do I want to be on the style of renovation. I would urge those who haven't bought a renovator style property yet to buy one that doesn't require an extension or a DA approval for the work. Do a cosmetic only renovation. Get something with a good grounding, with good piers. It's not going to crack too much when you move it around. Floor levels are intact, and just change kitchens, bathrooms, maybe a couple of internal walls, not too much as far as engineering goes. Maybe a big room that's got an extra living space you could repurpose into another bedroom, create a bit more capital growth that way. We're still on the renovation theme here. DAs in council can take some time, so you've got to be prepared to hold on to that property and what you're going to rent for while you hold it. I'm a big fan of when you buy, and your investment advisor can tell you which way you go, but I'm a big fan of 20% deposit in for an investment as opposed to 10 or 5. There is great leverage with 5 or 10 and you can buy more properties, but you've got mortgage insurance to consider and you're a bit more fragile to market fluctuations if the rents go down, if it doesn't rent for a while, or if the market actually goes down as well and you can all of a sudden be in negative equity. So when you've got 20% in, it's pretty hard for the rent not to cover the amount of interest that you've got to worry about. Okay, a couple of things on how we sell a property for more when the time comes. So think about 5 Ps and I'll add a 6th one on there. The first one is the property itself. So the actual bricks and mortar that's sitting on that piece of land, that's got a part of the value there. How you've done that building, the architecture of it, the look and feel from the street. The second one is the position of it, not actually put it to you that that's the highest value part of the whole equation. The third one is the presentation. So if we're going to market, we need to make sure the presentation's A1. And there's that many tips out there on doing it now, but I'm a big fan of getting someone in to help you do a makeover before it goes on the market and realise all the value that's there. Then the things that we can control once we're on the market are the promotion and the price. So if you get the proper campaign out there and you've got the right price guide on it, you should have competition on the property. The last thing I'll focus on is another P, and that's process. And that's a big job for the agent to recommend the right process for you. There's a million different agents out there and there's a great variance in the fees that they charge as well. But there's an even greater variance in the price that you get for the property if it's done correctly versus if it's done in a shortcut fashion. So have a think about that if you do go down that path. Of course, we'd be more than happy to talk to you if you need any advice on that. So the last thing is about Newcastle, what's happening now. Well, I've touched on some of those key drivers. And whether it's a residential investment where you're buying a house and a piece of real estate there that you can actually improve or change yourself, or you're buying off the plan, my outlook is that Newcastle's got an incredible decade ahead of it. Now, that doesn't mean year-on-year growth for a decade, but it does mean that we've got multiple drivers. When you look at other areas around the country that have gone up over time, I don't think that there's too many that have had as many drivers as us. We've got tourism, and that's increasing with the sale of the port and the cruise ships. We've got beautiful beaches, which attracts more people. We're quicker to get to the valley now with the expressway. The airport's being upgraded as well as the transport to and from the airport for the business community and the tourism community. We've got massive public infrastructure that's been going on in the CBD. And you've got confidence, you've got business. There's so many things to offer with Newcastle at the moment. If you want to get a bit more information about that inner city vibe, what's happening around Newcastle, you can pop into our display suite, Newcastle New Projects in the mall, and we'll give you a rundown. Thanks very much. 20 minutes.